Right now, as you watch this, your brain is doing something that scientists once considered impossible. It is running a hidden program, a deeply wired, energy-hungry network that activates not when you're focused, not when you're working, but the moment you stop. Scientists call it the default mode network. And the more they study it, the more they realize it is one of the most powerful and one of the most dangerous systems inside your skull. Because here is what nobody tells you. The brain you think you control, that is not the brain running the show. The real decisions, the real narratives, the real version of you, it all happens in the space between your thoughts, in the silence, in the daydream, and what's there might not be what you'd choose if you knew. Let's talk about what the default mode network actually is, why it switches on the second you zone out, and why your phone, your anxiety, your sense of self, and even your risk of depression are all connected to a network that science is only just beginning to understand. Your brain consumes about 20% of your body's total energy. That is remarkable for an organ that makes up only 2% of your body weight. But here is the part that stunned researchers when they first discovered it in the early 2000s. The brain does not consume less energy when you're resting. In some regions, it consumes more. When neuroscientist Marcus Reichel and his team at Washington University were scanning brains during cognitive tasks, they noticed something strange. Certain regions of the brain that were quiet when people were actively working would suddenly light up when those same people were doing nothing. Just sitting, just letting the mind wander. This wasn't random noise, it was organized, consistent, purposeful. They named it the default mode network, the brain's default state, the program that runs when nothing else is running. The default mode network spans several key regions of the brain. The medial prefrontal cortex, which is tied to your sense of self and social reasoning. The posterior cingulate cortex, which anchors your attention to internal thoughts and autobiographical memory. The angular gyrus, involved in language, imagination, and narrative. And the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, where past experiences are stored and replayed. Together, these regions form a circuit that is activated during self-referential thinking, thinking about yourself, thinking about other people, thinking about the past, and imagining the future. In other words, the default mode network is the network of your inner life. And this is where it gets complicated, because the inner life it generates is not always a peaceful place. Think about the last time your mind wandered. Were you replaying a conversation you had 3 days ago, rehearsing what you should have said differently? Were you imagining a future scenario, a worst-case version of something that might or might not happen? Were you constructing a story about who you are, who wronged you, what you deserve, what you're afraid of? This is the default mode network in action. And for many people, it doesn't feel like rest. It feels like torture. A landmark study published in Science magazine by Harvard researchers Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert tracked over 2,000 adults using an iPhone app that randomly pinged them throughout the day to ask what they were doing, what they were thinking about, and how happy they felt. The results were striking. People's minds were wandering 47% of the time, nearly half of every waking hour. Humans were not thinking about what they were actually doing. And crucially, a wandering mind was an unhappy mind, no matter what activity people were doing. A landmark study published in Science magazine of Harvard researchers Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert tracked over 2,000 adults using an iPhone app that randomly pinged them throughout the day to ask what they were doing, what they were thinking about, and how happy they felt. The results were striking. People's minds were wandering 47% of the time. Nearly half of every waking hour humans were not thinking about, they were actually doing. And crucially, a wandering mind was an unhappy mind. No matter what activity people were doing, they reported lower happiness when their mind had drifted away from the present moment. Killingsworth and Gilbert concluded something that ancient contemplative traditions had been saying for thousands of years. The ability to think about what is not happening right now is a cognitive achievement, but it comes at an emotional cost. But the default mode network is not simply a machine for misery. It serves critical functions. Without it, you would have no coherent sense of self. You wouldn't be able to simulate the future to imagine consequences, plan ahead, or set goals. You wouldn't be able to empathize with other people by simulating their mental states. You wouldn't be able to learn from the past by replaying and consolidating your memories. The default mode network is actually one of the most sophisticated systems in the human brain. It is what allows you to mentally time travel. It is what makes you capable, narrative, of building a story about your life that connects your past, your present, and your future into something that feels like a coherent identity. Without the default mode network, you would be trapped in an eternal present with no sense of who you are or where you're going. So why is it so often linked to depression? Research from neuroscientists at Stanford and other leading institutions has found that people who suffer from major depressive disorder show dramatically different patterns of default mode network activity. In healthy individuals, the DMN is deactivated when attention is directed outward toward a task. But in people with depression, this suppression fails. The DMN stays active or even hyperactive during tasks that should quiet it. The internal monologue runs on a loop. Self-referential thinking becomes ruminative. The narrative becomes fixed, dark, and self-defeating. This is what rumination looks like from the inside of the skull. It is not just a psychological pattern, it is a neurological one. The network responsible for your inner life has gotten stuck. And because it is always on, always generating narrative, always pulling your attention inward, it becomes very difficult to engage with the world outside. Some researchers now believe that the default mode network's overactivation is not just a symptom of depression, but one of its causes. When the brain defaults to negative, self-referential loops, you're not good enough, that will never work, nobody really understands you, those loops physically reshape the neural architecture over time. Thoughts become grooves. Grooves become highways, and what begins as a mood becomes a map. Now here's where it gets particularly relevant for the world we live in today. What do you think happens to your default mode network when you pick up your phone? When there's a 5-second gap in the day waiting for coffee, riding in an elevator, sitting in a waiting room, and instead of letting the mind rest, you fill it with scrolling? You interrupt the default mode network. At first glance, this sounds like a good thing. After all, the DMN generates anxiety, rumination, unhappy mind wandering, so blocking it with external stimulation might seem like relief. And in the short term, it is. Dopamine is released. The unpleasant sensation of being alone with your thoughts is temporarily dissolved. But here is the cost. The default mode network is also responsible for memory consolidation, creative insight, self-reflection, and the construction of your identity. When you never let it run, when you fill every moment of quiet with content, you deny your brain the very processing time it needs to integrate experience, understand yourself, and generate original thought. Top neuroscientists have spent years studying how the brain functions during rest. Her research suggests that quiet moments of mind wandering are not wasted time. They are when the brain processes emotional events, builds moral reasoning, develops empathy, and constructs identity. When young people and adults never experience unstructured mental downtime, they may be inadvertently stunting those very capacities. Think about where your best ideas came from. In the shower, on a long walk, lying in bed just before sleep. These are not coincidences. These are the default mode network doing what it was designed to do, making unexpected connections, weaving together disparate threads of experience and knowledge into something new. The neurological term for this is associative thinking, and it is one of the hallmarks of human creativity. But there is something else the default mode network does that is rarely discussed, and it connects to one of the most profound questions in neuroscience. Where does the self come from? The default mode network is often described as the neural basis of the self. When you think about who you are, your personality, your memories, your values, your relationships, you are activating this network. Your sense of identity is not stored somewhere like a file in a cabinet. It is actively constructed every single day by a biological process. You are not a fixed thing. You are a story your brain tells itself continuously in the space between focused moments. And this has radical implications. Because if the self is a construction, a narrative generated by a biological network, then it is malleable. It can change, it can be disrupted, it can be hacked, upgraded, dismantled, or rebuilt. This is exactly what happens during certain psychedelic experiences, and researchers are now studying it intensely. Studies from Johns Hopkins, NYU, and Imperial College London have found that psilocybin, the active compound in so-called magic mushrooms, dramatically suppresses default mode network activity. The sense of self dissolves. The personal narrative goes quiet. And for many participants, especially those suffering from depression, addiction, or end-of-life anxiety, the fact that suppressing the default mode network can lead to profound healing experiences tells us something remarkable. The constant internal narrator, the ego, the judge, may itself be a source of suffering. Not because having a self is bad, but because the network that generates the self can get trapped in patterns that no longer serve us. So what can you actually do with this information? First, let your mind wander. Not passively, not compulsively, but intentionally. Build small windows of unstructured mental time into your day. Put the phone down. Sit with the discomfort of silence. Let the default mode network do its job. Not every moment of mental wandering will be pleasant, but some of those moments are where your creativity lives, where your memories consolidate, where your identity evolves. Learn to observe your DMN, not just be inside it. Mindfulness meditation, which has been studied extensively across hundreds of clinical trials, trains the brain to notice when the default mode network has activated, without being swept away by its contents. The moment you notice you're ruminating, you are no longer fully inside the rumination. You've stepped slightly outside it. That small gap is everything. Third, if your internal narrative has become relentlessly negative, know that this is not a character flaw. It is a neurological pattern. It can change. Therapies like CBT, EMDR, and emerging treatments like psilocybin-assisted therapy all show through brain imaging that they physically alter default mode network activity in measurable ways. The story your brain tells about you is not fixed, it is editable. Your brain's most dangerous mode is also its most human one. The default mode network is the seat of your imagination, your empathy, your creativity, your memories, your sense of self. It is the part of you that dreams, that mourns, that falls in love, that wonders about the meaning of your life. It is also the part that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning, replaying old arguments and imagining future disasters. The question is not how to silence it. The question is how to live with it wisely, to use its extraordinary capacities without being consumed by its darkest patterns. Because every time your mind wanders, your brain is trying to tell you something. The question is whether you're willing to listen.